is Rachel Federman. I'm Associate Curator of Modern and Contemporary Drawings at the Morgan Library and Museum. And I just want to thank you for joining me today. I think this topic of drawing in the computer age has particular significance and relevance to all of our lives, as you know, so many artists now are sort of trapped in their apartments without access to their studios. They might be turning to different kinds of media, maybe the computer. And as so many of us are experiencing art exclusively through the computer, I think it's an interesting topic to think about today. Everyone found it completely pointless, grotesque, practically immoral to try coupling a cold, inhumane machine with something so profoundly human, which we call art. So this is Vera Molnar speaking about her pioneering work with computers in the late 1960s. Interruptions is one of the earliest drawings she created with a computer. It was exhibited early last year in the exhibition By Any Means, Contemporary Drawings from the Morgan, which first prompted me to develop this talk. By Any Means explored the proliferation of unusual techniques and materials among artists working on paper since the 1950s. Drawing with the aid of a computer is one such category, albeit a diverse and unruly one. And I should sort of add as a caveat that this talk, which is necessarily limited, also tends to focus really on drawings from the Morgan's collection. So it's limited in scope, but I hope that it's able to sort of gesture to larger issues. Vera Molnar was born in Budapest and moved to Paris in the 1940s, where she still lives. In 1960, she co-founded GROB, the Visual Arts Research Group, which was comprised of artists who were dedicated to understanding mathematical simulation and aesthetics. Long before she began using computers, she created art by hand, like these examples here, which expressed her iterative sequential approach. In a 1975 article in Leonardo, a journal that focuses on the intersection of science and the arts, she wrote, "I began to make non-figurative pictures that were the result of a procedure in which initial simple geometrical elements and their combination were successively altered in specific ways, a procedure that I continue to follow." And she remarked playfully on her machine imaginaire, the imaginary computer that produced such works. But Molnar recognized that a real computer would better suit her purposes. She said, "Thanks to its many possibilities of combination, the computer helps to systematically research the visual realm, helps the painter to free himself from cultural ready-mades and find combinations in forms never seen before, neither in nature nor at a museum. It helps to create inconceivable images." In 1968, Molnar gained access to an IBM 2250 mainframe computer. It occupied an entire room in the computing department of the University of Paris-Sorbonne and became available for Molnar's explorations only when students took to the streets during the protests of May 1968. Mainframe computers were not only large, they were extraordinarily expensive, costing in the millions of dollars. As a result, access to these machines was restricted to governments, large corporations, and research universities. The first device to incorporate a cathode ray computer monitor, the Stromberg-Carlson 4020, was released commercially in 1959, but at a cost of roughly $325,000 and $500 per minute of output, usage by artists was uncommon, though not unheard of. The device, which could also record images and text on paper or film, was famously used by artists at AT&T Bell Labs in New Jersey. Molnar instead created her earliest computer drawings blind, which is to say that she did not have access to a monitor on which she could visualize the final result. She wrote her own program using the language Fortran and punched it into a series of cards like this one, which were fed into the computer. The program was interpreted by the machine and printed on a Benson plotter, which is like a mechanical arm that holds a pen. This printing mechanism explains the drawing's slightly jittery lines, which can give the mistaken impression that they've actually been drawn by hand. Molnar created just one of each composition, preserving only those of which she approved. In this sense, they are more like drawings than editioned prints, although it would have been possible for her to create multiples. In all, there are about 30 unique interruptions. The voids in the drawings are the result of randomness that she built into the program. This was more complicated, but more interesting than limiting myself to an all-over composition, she said. Molnar defines an all-over composition as one in which there are no privileged places on the surface. Every place is occupied by a form, a line, a color having the same visual weight. By contrast, the holes interrupt the all-over composition, creating what she called a disturbed equilibrium. Working in series, she developed a method in which each work prompted her to alter the program for the next, and she called this the conversational method. Molnar's computer drawings challenged traditional conceptions of drawing as an intimate record of an artist's thoughts and an index of their singular hand. But as Molnar observed, the introduction of computers into the creative act incited not only skepticism, but actually anger. In the quote that I read at the beginning of this talk, she uses the term immoral to describe the response of critics to her work. They objected to it not on aesthetic grounds, but on ethical ones, perhaps fearing the corruption of human creativity by technology. As art historian Grant Taylor has written, it is hard to imagine how foreign the computer must have seemed to a critic with traditional classical training. But ironically, Molnar is herself a classicist. In one essay, she quotes the Renaissance artist and philosopher Leon Battista Alberti, who wrote, "A composition is such a pictorial performance whereby the different parts of a painting are united, linked together." She views the computer as an expedient for exploring fundamental questions of beauty and composition. She asks, are these classical laws of classical composition still usable and valid today? And she answers her own question, saying, these principles, like art itself, are universal and permanent, constituting the solid basis of every artistic endeavor. In a striking body of work that she began in the 1980s, Molnar sought to reconcile her classical impulses with simulations of her late mother's erratic handwriting in a series called Letters from My Mother. She observed that her mother's handwriting grew more chaotic both within individual letters and across time as she aged and became ill. And here you can see a series of trials in which the simulated handwriting of her mother, sort of, using the computer to simulate the handwriting of her mother, becomes more and more disordered both within each drawing and from one composition to the next. Molnar's desire to simulate her mother's handwriting is a means of remembering and perhaps coming to terms with her loss. Of the series, Molnar said, "Actually, I do not know quite what I wanted, to simulate my mother's writing or to use her handwriting as a pretext for working out new principles of composition and to remain, in spite of everything, in the specific and perhaps classical territory of the visual arts." With this remark, she suggests a false dichotomy between subjectivity and classicism, pointing perhaps to her own discomfort with the overtly autobiographical subject matter. In some drawings from this series, she combined computer-made marks with marks made by hand, underscoring the inescapably personal nature of the project. Molnar was not alone in her drive to merge her talents with new developments in the sciences. At a time when technological advancements, including the computer, were closely linked with wars hot and cold, there was a desire among many in the arts and technology fields to forge humanistic alliances. Architect Eero Saarinen collaborated with designers Ray and Charles Eames on the IBM Pavilion for the 1964 World's Fair in Flushing Meadows, Queens. This iconic photo by Bob Edelman shows the so-called People Wall, which lifted the crowd into an egg-shaped pavilion. Once inside, they were surrounded by projections on 15 screens, which collectively conveyed the speed and efficiency, but also the humanity of computing. It's important to note that a similar concept had already been realized in Stony Point, New York, by the avant-garde filmmaker Stan Vanderbeek. In his Moviedrome, visitors were invited to lie down on the floor for an immersive experience involving multiple projections. Vanderbeek was himself among the earliest artist adopters of computer technology, having worked with engineer Kenneth Knowlton at Bell Labs to create some of the first computer-generated drawings and films, such as his Poemfield films. It is clear that there was a permeability, openness, and optimism, which compelled some artists to embrace technology. And remember, it was the mid-1960s when Nam June Paik and others first gained access to portable video equipment, inventing an entirely new art form, video art. In 1966, artists Robert Rauschenberg and Robert Whitman co-founded Experiments in Art and Technology with Billy Kluver and Fred Waldauer, both engineers at Bell Labs. It was their hope that by bringing together artists and engineers, they could, in Rauschenberg's words, make work that could not exist otherwise. MoMA asked Experiments in Art and Technology, or EAT, to curate the concluding section of its 1968 exhibition, The Machine as Seen at the End of the Mechanical Age, a survey on the machine in art. The metal-bound exhibition catalog begins with Leonardo da Vinci, and ends with a 5-foot wide computer rendering by Leon Harmon and Kenneth Knowlton from Bell Labs entitled Studies in Perception 1. In order to produce the print, they scanned a photo of a nude woman and converted the grayscale values into symbols. It garnered attention when it was featured in a press conference in Robert Rauschenberg's loft and subsequently appeared in the New York Times under the attention-grabbing headline, Art and Science Proclaim Alliance in Avant-Garde Loft. The Times pulled a detail from the composition to show how the symbols reconstituted the image. EAT was asked to design and program the Pepsi Pavilion at the 1970 World's Fair in Osaka, Japan. Ultimately, the collaboration with Pepsi turned sour, underscoring the tensions inherent in any union of art and commerce. Negative experiences were also reported by artists involved in the Los Angeles County Museum of Art's Art and Technology program, which was inaugurated in 1967. And this illustration from the 1971 report on the Art and Technology program pictures the museum as a machine, possibly a computer, ready to be plugged into the outside world. Similar to experiments in art and technology, LACMA's program involved pairing or attempting to pair artists with corporations so that the artists could collaborate with company scientists and engineers. For example, Klaus Oldenburg was matched with Disney, Jean Dubuffet with the American Cement Corporation, and op artist Victor Vasarely with IBM. In most cases, the artists didn't seek to produce work that was radically different from what they had done before, but rather to take advantage of the opportunity in order to expand the scale or scope of their art. This is the same dynamic that animates Vera Molnar's use of computers, which she views as an extension of and an improvement upon the machine imaginaire with which she had long been engaged. Although Frederick Hammersley's transition to computers was less straightforward and less enduring than Molnar's, he too viewed computers as both a generative tool and one that was consistent with his existing practice. Hammersley began to make his computer drawings, as he called them, in 1969 while teaching at the University of New Mexico. He was nearly 50 years old and well established in his career as a painter. Known primarily for bold geometric paintings, he was among a group of artists active in Los Angeles who were dubbed abstract classicists. Hammersley moved to Albuquerque in 1968. It was a time when, as he put it, I'd painted myself out. Charles Maddox, a maker of kinetic or moving sculptures, also taught at the university. He encouraged Hammersley to take a computer drawing class in which students learned how to use Art 1, one of the first art programs created for visual artists who lacked programming skills. Art 1 was developed by Richard Williams, a professor of computer science at the University of New Mexico, and Catherine Nash, an artist, in another example of artist-engineer collaboration. In 1969, Hammersley contributed an essay to the journal Leonardo titled, My First Experience with Computer Drawing, in which he usefully described the process by which he came to create his computer drawings on the university's IBM mainframe. I was shown how to prepare a computer program and how to transfer it to an IBM punch card by machine. The alphanumeric characters we could draw with were the alphabet, 10 numerals, and 11 symbols, such as periods, dashes, slashes, etc. The working area of the completed drawing is made up of a field of 105 characters disposed horizontally and 50 vertically. The program prepared on one or more punch cards permits the making of lines, rectangles, triangles, circles, and ovals, and also exponential curves. In addition, any character can be printed on top of any other. The range of patterns and shapes that Hammersley was able to realize within these parameters is striking. In Tea Talk by Turns, he overlaid one character on top of another to produce a range of values moving up and down the sheet. In Half a Bufferin, which you see at the top, he repeats the same vibrating pattern on 25 lines, skipping every other row. 4 times around is a more complicated pattern of targets and diamonds, but remarkably, both of these drawings utilize only periods and apostrophes. Ultimately, Hammersley produced 72 distinct computer-generated drawings, as well as a few variants. He considered the set of 72 to be a progressive series or suite, though the drawings do not, for the most part, progress in any predictable or obvious way. Novel as this method of working was to Hammersley, he described the computer drawings as an outgrowth of the same ideas he used in his paintings, citing the rhythm, sequencing, and proper arrangement of elements as a means to produce the remarkable effect of being in sum more than they are individually. By the late 1950s, Hammersley had begun to keep notebooks and composition books in which he recorded his process of determining a painting's final composition. These investigations allowed him, in his words, to paint without thinking. He said, quote, "I wait until everything feels just right, and then in one sense, the painting is done before I painted." Hammersley's habit of rigorously preparing for his paintings made him an optimal candidate for computer drawing. Having determined in advance the desired outcome and punched the cards accordingly, the drawings all but made themselves, painting without thinking indeed. Why then did Hammersley abandon the medium after 1969, producing hard-edge paintings for the rest of his life? One clue lies in his description of making a painting. It was a process that involved laying on paint in 4 directions and using a palette knife, never tape, to generate his crisp edges. "It's almost like I disappear," he said. "It's almost like you're meditating and just to the rhythm of doing it." When he returned to painting in 1970, he began keeping highly detailed inventories of his work. Each application of paint was recorded and dated, as was the precise mixture used, suggesting that there was something about the facture or the physical making of the work that he had missed. In the end, this was simply not something that Hammersley wished to give up. I've also wondered if the limitations of the materials themselves bothered him. As his inventories suggest, Hammersley was keenly invested in his materials and craftsmanship. You can see from this photo of a computer drawing taken in raking light that the paper is extremely thin and subject to warping. When framing these works for By Any Means, our conservator was concerned about hinging or attaching the sheets to the backing board, as is typically done, and she opted instead to use easily removable magnets in the corners, wrapped in paper to make them less visible. En route to the 21st century, I'd like to pause in 1983 with a different application of the computer in drawing. The influential artist and composer John Cage made 170 pencil drawings over the course of a decade that were inspired by the Zen rock garden of the Ryoenji Temple in Kyoto. Their compositions were dictated by the I Ching, the ancient Chinese divination manual. Each element, from the choice of rock to its placement on the page and the pencil that Cage used to trace it, was predetermined and plotted out. In this drawing from the Morgan's collection, which is one of the first Ryoenji drawings he made, the equation in the title tells us that he made 30 tracings, that's 2R, where R is equal to 15, which is the number of rocks in the temple. 4 indicates the number of pencils of different hardnesses that he used. In lieu of the time-consuming process of flipping coins to arrive at numerical solutions between 1 and 64, as the I Ching dictates, Cage made use of a computer program that simulated the I Ching, generating answers quickly. The program provided solutions to such questions as, how far should the left edge of the drawing be from the left edge of the sheet? And which pencil, stone, and position between 1 and 64 should be used for each tracing? By 1983, Cage had already been using the program, which was developed in the hothouse environment of Bell Labs, for nearly 15 years. He once explained his use of chance operations with the statement, "This way I can draw a line without getting embarrassed." This recalls Molnar's ambivalence around the personal content of Letters from My Mother, and also Hammersley's desire to paint without thinking. Perhaps this says something about the kind of artist who uses computers. For Cage, chance procedures facilitated the abnegation of ego, a key tenet of Zen Buddhism. But unlike for Molnar, for Cage, the physical action of drawing was a valuable meditative process in itself, just as painting was for Hammersley. Marcia Cottrell is a contemporary artist who uses a computer and laser printer to create drawings with toner. Although she doesn't draw them by hand, she has developed a unique slowed down process in which her presence is essential. In the late 90s, she worked as a layout designer in the office of a magazine publisher. It was in that period that she began to experiment with a computer and printer. Explaining her transition away from painting, she said, "Since I couldn't be in my studio, it was natural for me to consider how I might use the tools in my immediate environment." She began by exploring the formal possibilities of punctuation marks, shrinking and layering them to create fingerprint-like shapes and smudges. "I was interested in the idea of making an organic mark with a computer," she says. Cottrell often emphasizes the role of the body, pointing out that printer toner is carbon-based. In this work, she imprinted her hands on 2 sheets of paper covered in toner. She stopped the printer midway through its process, after the toner had been applied, but before it had been heat fused to the paper. This assertion of subjectivity is emblematic of Cottrell's interest in the body as it interacts with technology. She has compared her process to conventional sketching, saying, "With a crayon on a piece of paper, a gesture might be motivated by one's arm or body. I hold the gesture in my mind and try to map it out by sliding the mouse a few inches." This emphasis on the connection of mind and body evokes the Renaissance concepts of disegno and invenzione, in which the drawing hand was understood as a direct extension of the inventing mind. In Cottrell's work, the computer and laser printer are inserted into this process as collaborators and mediators. She has embraced the computer monitor, design software, and the technology of laser printing as ready-mades. Her mastery of these tools includes a keen awareness of their limitations and the ability to work within them or to turn them to her advantage. This is Cottrell's description of how she made this work, Old Museum Interior 7, which is in the Morgan's collection. And the description comes from our artist questionnaire. When we acquire works from living artists, we send them a questionnaire in the hopes that they'll give us a response as informative as this one. So this is Marcia talking about her process. "The image was developed directly onto a single sheet of handmade paper in many passes through a laser printer, as rectangles of varying sizes and dimensions and in varying tonalities of gray were moved, scaled, added, deleted when no longer needed within the digital file. The material can't be removed, which makes the process completely additive and very slow. Unlike a photographic image made with a camera that exists as a complete digital file and can be reprinted, there is no digital file or digital image that corresponds to this drawing. The file begins as an empty page, and decisions there are made relative to how I see things developing on the paper. By the end of the process, only a skeletal file remains, a page of geometric shapes that does not bear any resemblance to the image on the paper." Each of Cottrell's adjustments on the screen is made in response to the appearance of the printed image on the sheet, so there's a constant toggling between monitor and paper, separated by the action of reinserting the sheet into the printer's feeder tray. This is not Jackson Pollock flinging paint onto a canvas on the floor of his studio, but it is a strangely physical process, and a familiar one for those of us who have used the technology ourselves. And it can be meditative too. Cottrell says, "Time is slowed while I'm working. There's a correlation between my level of concentration reaching its limit, the paper being unable to accept any more material, and the drawing being finished." She used a similar process of layering to create her Aperture series works, with round-edged rectangular shapes that flicker suggestively, as if at the intersection of a tangible here and an immaterial nowhere. Although two-dimensional, their perceptual affect is akin to the spatial environments of light and space artists Doug Wheeler or James Turrell, embodied rather than merely visual. She has also created works that she calls environments, which feature tantalizingly unreal two-dimensional spaces that somehow seem capable of being occupied by a body. Although her chosen tools impose limits, the works themselves gesture toward limitlessness. Hers is an art that takes the ubiquity of technology as a given, as well as the countless hours that we spend facing monitors. In her work, she plays with the idea of the monitor as a penetrable aperture rather than a solid screen. Cottrell also invokes the traditional iconography of the sublime: vast horizons, glowing moons, radiating suns, solar eclipses. Although they conjure natural phenomena, these works are also self-reflexive. The glowing orb in this drawing, which recalls 19th century astronomical drawings or the intense moons of romantic artists like Samuel Palmer or Caspar David Friedrich, can also be seen as a visualization of the beam of light that inscribes the image onto the laser printer's drum. She also flaunts production errors, reminding us that these otherworldly compositions were created on an everyday office printer. At a time when nearly all of us hold a sophisticated camera in our pockets, Cottrell's work is a reminder that the sublime is not necessarily located in representations of the visible, photographs of the sunset, for example, but rather, in the words of the philosopher Jean-Francois Lyotard, in the effort of alluding to the non-demonstrable. That which is not demonstrable, he writes, is that which stems from ideas and for which one cannot cite or represent any example, case in point, or even symbol. He offers humanity and the universe as examples of the non-demonstrable. Cottrell's project is unquestionably different from those of earlier pioneers of computer drawing, but her search for the ineffable connects her with Vera Molnar, who also saw computers as catalysts to create forms never seen before, inconceivable images. What could be more human than that? Thank you all for joining me today. I really appreciate your attention.
Rachel, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We do have a few questions in the chat. The first one is, why was it shocking for critics or artists that Vera Molnar would use a computer, a machine, to make art when people were already making abstract art with typewriters for decades?
Oh, that's actually a really good point. I would say that the same critics who had a problem with Vera Molnar using a machine to create art probably also had issues with artists who were using typewriters to create art. I think it's more it says more about the critics than the state of art at that point. And Vera Molnar also, she wasn't the first artist to create art with computers. She was sort of among the first, but already in the mid 1960s, this kind of work had begun to be done. So yeah, I mean, I think it says more about the state of art criticism than it does about the things that artists were doing, which of course have always been on the cutting edge of technology.
The next question is, what is the scale of these drawings? Could you give us a sense of about approximation?
Yes, so these drawings, Marcia's drawings are sort of in the 9 by 12 inch range. And Vera Molnar's also is around 10 by 10 inches. It's a square. So these are relatively small drawings. Frederick Hammersley's are about 11 by 14. So these works tend to be smaller scale works. Yeah, maybe I should have included the dimensions. It's so hard. And this drawing too is, you know, they're all sort of very human scaled. And in this case, in the case of Cage, he's actually tracing these rocks. So it's, you know, it's, if you can imagine rocks this size being transposed onto paper, that's the approximate size of the drawing.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you to Rachel. If you are interested in more presentations like this, we ask that you please go to the Morgan's website, Morgan Connected. It is www.themorgan.org/Morgan-Connected. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.